In the United States and perhaps in other Western countries as well, nobody teaches us how to respond to trauma, which is puzzling since every single one of us will experience numerous traumas from birth to death, and a growing percentage of the population are dealing with complications from complex PTSD and PTSD, which typically results in hundreds of thousands of dollars in waste, in lost opportunity, in damaged relationships and therapies and abuse, and it ripples out. It's infectious. So we're living in a crazy environment where the most important things to understand in human relationships are exactly what is not talked about in school and rarely in parenting as well. So that's why this video is relevant. So the first thing that someone who understands psychology will notice with this series of phone conversations recorded with Barb's permission is that she is regressed, meaning her first message, she's about 3 years old. She feels all alone and she feels helpless. Now, what's going on here? That means that in this great country of ours, at 3 years old, Barb was experiencing a number of traumas that she was helpless to deal with. And that something's gone on in the series of interactions between her and the high community and organization, which she, of course, goes into, that are bringing up those feelings of being 3 years old again. And that nobody is stepping forward in the adult to advocate for that young 3-year-old. And so she's stuck there. Now, we love to pride ourselves in the ignorance of our ignorance. And so you or I probably don't know anything about what it's like to be 50, 60, 70 years old and to feel absolutely trapped in a memory that's 3 years old and have everyone around you doing exactly what keeps you stuck there while pretending or claiming or shaming and blaming that you don't get out of this. It's very much like a broken bone, which your father starts hammering away at age 2. And then you go to school and the gym teacher hammers away at it, and the school teachers hammer away at it. And as soon as the children in a sociopathic culture notice that you feel a lot of pain there, then you wince and feel traumatized when people touch your arm. So those kids, of course, start pulling your arm and terrifying you even more, because the message is we're going to ignore our impact, we're going to deny our impact, we're going to hurt you over and over and over again in the same place, and then we're going to delight as a cultural protocol in the exacerbation of your most painful feelings for the entertainment of the sociopaths who are watching passively and doing nothing. So in this dynamic, most of us are not quite idiotic enough as adults to understand that someone doing that kind of thing again on a weak bone that's very fractious, that's never gotten full medical attention in a culture that just a few hundred years ago used to shame people for needing a doctor. That's how dumb we were a few hundred years ago. Now we just shame people for needing an emotional doctor. We are slowly developing the science of correlation and the science of perception to a point where more and more is becoming real, that we were too ignorant to understand and too arrogant to address. You should have seen the level of arrogance when Louis Pasteur discovered the germ. That's where pasteurizing comes from, to kill what Louis Pasteur discovered. So doctors kept murdering patients for decades because they couldn't see the germs that Pasteur hypothesized, because patients were dying on the operating table when physicians refused to wash their hands and refused to sterilize their instruments. So doctors continued to murder people, and they continued to ostracize and ridicule Pasteur. This is a pattern that happens over and over and over again at the cutting edge of what is always a very rudimentary understanding in culture. To think that we are profoundly advanced or anywhere near the edge of all there is to know is one of the most arrogant things that a human being is capable of. And we are very capable of that arrogance. So we have this arena where we have a culture that is so dumb it doesn't know that it's dumb, which will, in good cultural etiquette, start picking away at what Barb is doing wrong. So the culture did not protect Barb from the sexual abuse of her father. The culture did not protect Barb from the various traumatic events in her life. The culture did not protect Barb from the emotions of worthlessness and shame that come from nobody doing anything about it. The culture did not protect Barb from the varying bullying protocols. The culture did not protect Barb from the chauvinism that told her she's worthless because she's a woman. They did not protect Barb from any of the pain she is dealing with today. Nor did the culture, in its enlightenment, give her free therapy, remedy the issue, teach her parents how to behave. No. Barb has been systematically betrayed by her culture, and the culture has a remedy for dealing with its defects. It's called shaming the victim. And so the culture has trained you to be its deflector, its defense. Wow, she's not being very mature. That's a good one, right? Blame the victim. Well, why doesn't she do this? In other words, why don't I learn why she can't do this? No. Why doesn't she do this? Let's just blame the victim so we can feel better about ourselves. This is what a cowardly and sociopathic culture does very effectively for the 25% of sexual abuse survivors in this country, most of whom are sensible enough to know that it's not in their interest to show who they are or the impact of that abuse, because they have learned through experience just how sociopathic, just how ignorant of its ignorance, and just how arrogant and insensitive this cult of a culture is. So let's all prepare to assess exactly what's wrong with Barb. And of course, the goal will be, here's the goal. The goal will be to make sure that you do not have to do anything, number one, that you do not have to spend any money, number two, that you do not have to take any responsibility, that you feel good about doing nothing and spending nothing, that you don't have to read any books or learn anything, that you do not have to make the connection between the facilitator's abuse protocol towards Barb and your own abuse protocol towards an employer, that you don't have to make that connection, that you don't have to make the connection between the abuse that Barb is feeling and the regret stage that she's feeling and the parts of you that have been treated and gotten the same message, that are in equal states of terror, grief, and loneliness, and which have, if you have learned to numb and dissociate to the degree that this culture would like, you have no awareness of, because they are very nicely partitioned. Something I had the great pleasure of denying and protecting myself to everyone's detriment until a high dose of psychedelics, which I was not ready for, were pushed into my consciousness by a high facilitator who was unlicensed and didn't know what he was doing. So you have this great series of luxury. Now, what's the common pattern in all this? Now, the other thing is you will not contact a government official to protest government policy. No. And the final goal will be that you feel superior, that you feel good about the culture, yourself, your inactivity, your passivity, your chauvinism, and can continue exactly as you have been before without changing anything. This is your goal as a good American, somewhat suspiciously and angrily, actually looking at the impact of this culture on its people. And of course, you will want to find out and exonerate the high facilitators from all this, because they did, frankly, more than you, right? And you certainly wouldn't want to do more than them. And so we can't have that. We can't have, we can't have an intelligent protocol, meaning that's time intensive or anything like that. No. We want to deflect, minimize, blame, and the most efficient thing to do is just to use the cultural programming. So the culture says that children are less valuable than people. It says that in a million different ways, pays lip service to the opposite, but communicates again and again domination, bullying, lack of parenting, training, lack of protection. Not a single person asking many children to rate the abuse in their entire childhood. There is no census that goes out to children in this country that says, has a father or mother touched you here? Have you been shouted at? Has this happened? Has this happened? Do you need help? There's not a single census that shows up during an entire lifetime for a child. You haven't gotten that census. You don't matter to the program of this power structure that's going forward in willful ignorance and criminal negligence. So now that we understand what your goal is, let's take a look at what's going on. So the first thing to understand is that you need to track how old someone is in trauma and in abuse. That will give you a sense of their inner ability. It will give you a sense of how big the pressure is in their outer environment. People who regress do so when they believe it is safer to regress than to confront their abuser. That's really the only reason. Children have a healthy natural defense. Stop touching me. I don't like that. But then when they get hit and beaten repeatedly for communicating what's hurting them, now they're split. They're divided because they've still got the part that says, stop, don't do this. I need help, please. They've still got that part. But there is a larger majority within them who has noticed the pattern that the more effectively this part gives voice and asks for help, the more brutally they're shamed, punished, beaten, and traumatized. Now, once that takes place, which only takes place in a sociopathic culture such as our own, empathic cultures do not deal with this phenomena. An empathic culture, when a baby starts crying and being unhappy, when a child starts screaming, an empathic culture attunes to the situation and to the child, and the crying stops because it's no longer needed. And the speaking stops about so-and-so touched me here and so hit me here and so, because it's no longer happening. It doesn't stop because the person has been bludgeoned, shamed, and guilt-tripped into silence. it stops because the environment is healthy enough to justify transcending the trauma and returning to the human areas of the brain, the human areas which are not predicated by fight, flight, freeze. So that didn't happen for Barb. And the message that she's the bad one, that she will be in more danger if she speaks about the experiences and truth and gets help than if she doesn't, is also a very important predication for age regression. So you'll notice things like Barb saying she's really glad she's going to be moving because no one at high will be able to find her because I don't feel safe. Well, at that point, she might be able to tell the truth a little bit more, but right now there's still some part of her that feels like she's going to die if she tells the truth. But then there's another part that wants to fight through that and tell the truth. And nobody wants to listen. People see her truth as the enemy. The abusers in our culture of any power structure always see felt human experience as the enemy, not as something to be brought out, to be shared, and to respond to in a healthy, mature, loving community. And the abuser generally, feeling threatened by the truth, will try to exclude the truth teller that's threatening their own sense of agenda and identity, which is why you have to disconnect Dane Rose's email accounts so that he can't tell. This is why you have to sue Dane Rose when he makes a website to bypass that communication control. See, they thought it was undone, right? No more, he can't write to anyone. Okay, great. What? He's built a website, now we've got to sue him to shut it down. And then we've got to tell Barb, you can't take a workshop. That would be another way that she could talk about things, because you have to check with us first. We're the gatekeepers, and we're only going to let you meet your need for love and belonging, a human need, Maslow's. We're only going to let you meet your need to feel safe and welcome in this environment if you agree to keep our secret. You don't keep the secret, you don't get to belong. And our truth, by the way, is more important than your truth. We've got to rewrite reality so your truth doesn't exist. Our truth exists. And so we've got to rewrite, not only are you not welcome, but you're lying. And you could be doing it like this. So we've got to do all this different rewriting. Because the felt experience of one child, of one human being, is threatening to abusers that need secrecy to continue the abuse pattern. So we have to understand that this is the dynamic in which you are participating in. You're participating when you think, I don't want my secrets coming out, so high secrets shouldn't come out either. Why do they have to tell? Why these victims, keep going on about feelings years later? I mean, why don't they just forgive and snap and be positive? Why don't they look on the bright side of sexual abuse? I mean, look at Trump's prostitutes. Look at all the money they made. Or, the silence orders. Why can't they look at the bright side? The bright side of all these lies and abuses and betrayals, and get over it and just admit that they're ruining people's lives. In fact, they should feel ashamed making the president of the United States, actually accountable for his own behavior. They're ashamed of themselves. They're just greedy, power hungry. They just want more money. Get rid of this. Let's go back to the Dark Ages. Why don't we start stoning women to death again for disobeying their husbands, or deny them the right to vote? How far back do we want to go to protect the abuser when it's our abuser? It's me, it's my, how far back do we want to go? So this is a very important context for you to sit with in understanding what abuse survivors in the United States have gone through for generations, whether it's African Americans, whether it's women, whether it's deaf people being raped by the Catholic Church in a systemic protocol, whether it's the 60% of Americans with unresolved, unhealed trauma. This is all the stuff that we are asking an abuse survivor to carry so that we can feel more comfortable continuing in a pattern of behavior that is not good for anyone. What do you want to do with someone who's regressed? You diagnose the environment. You diagnose the culture. You diagnose the parents. You diagnose the therapist. You diagnose the friends that together as a circle are offering no place for that consciousness to stand up and step forward. That's what we're looking at with an regressed person. You know that there is a single individual that understands the honor of protecting and taking a stand for an abuse survivor when the regression ceases. When the regression is active, you know that I'm not doing enough, you're not doing it enough, High is not doing enough, our government is not doing enough, her parents and family are not doing enough to let that little girl know that it's actually safe to tell the truth and stand in dignity and honor her feminine self. Don't look at her, because if we swap the places, let's just take you, turn you into a woman in a chauvinistic culture with a narcissistic father who incestuously abuses you, with a culture that shames you and blames you for talking about it, in a culture that doesn't want to know how you're actually doing, but it wants to pretend, hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? Hey, how you doing? I just don't want to know. I don't want to know. It feverishly asks you exactly what it doesn't want to know. That has no place for the 2 to 5 hour conversations that need to take place for this stuff to make sense. That wants to look at you as a sex object. That wants to take your money for all kinds of things that are not particularly healthy. That shames and blames you for this addiction and that addiction, etc. That needs you for sex. And then when you get regressed into that fear and stuff, when everyone colludes to communicate that it's your fault, and you can look on the bright side, and you can forgive, and you can pretend that you're ever so spiritual and better than other human beings who do the exact same thing. They go down into their reptilian brain, a remembrance of 200 million years of devolution to a crocodile age when there was no empathy, when there was no love, when there was no human feeling. And we can take an individual systematically back 200 million years simply by shaming and blaming them for speaking a truth that some power structure is not ready or willing to be responsible for. That's all you have to do. If you think you're better than Barb, forget it. You may be luckier. You may be more unconscious, but not better than. And the real question is, what does it take for an individual or a community or a power structure or a school to actually let Barb become the teacher of the invisible blind spots in our culture that we, as a community and as a people, take responsibility for resolving? Now, if you will step into that, if you will own it, you have a chance to take a stand for your own internalized abuser and your own internalized shame-based, denied, repressed inner little girl. Whether you're a man or a woman, you have an inner feminine. You have emotions, you have vulnerabilities, you have needs, you have helplessnesses, you have betrayed trusts. And you know in those areas, however much you have walled them off, you know what that feels like. But in this culture, of course, you do not know how to respond. So have humility. Read. talk to a trauma therapist, read The Body Keeps the Score, and show profound kindness to this part of yourself, this part of our species that is bearing the disproportionate brunt of our social ignorance and our narcissistic shame that we dump on the most vulnerable people in our culture. There's nothing beautiful or proud about it. It's profoundly self-loathing to raise adults in this state, to raise regressed children in this state. And it is far more expensive, emotionally, financially, physically, and relationally, to heal and sustain these abuse patterns than it is to step up to the plate and prevent them. That is why every hour the Human Awareness Institute does not own this as its number one responsibility, the ability and willingness to respond, to learn what it doesn't know. I consider it a force of evil, acting on false trust, with the same chauvinism of we're more important than you because we've got the power. It's not a healthy world or a healthy culture, and it needs you, the goodness and the beauty in you, the truth in you, to start speaking and to honor what you hear in the face of the sociopathic wall that this culture has erected to deny who you are.